24 months. We do have the recording. It has been a lot, and it's been in all fronts. And in my 20 plus years of working, I would say I've never seen anything quite like it. It is everything from, yes, we're dealing with a global pandemic that continues to change. I think today I read that they found the latest variant that's coming fast, Omicron, in Washington State. So like, okay, we'll see how that one progresses. And we've got rapid adoption of digital technologies, and it's changed professionals. One of the things that we do is spend a lot of time making sure that people understand how to adopt these. And, you know, if companies were not digital companies prior to the pandemic, they absolutely, to survive, have had to be. One of the interesting things that I've seen, and I'm curious if you have as well, is some of the companies that maybe I've worked with that are a little bit slower in their pace have said, I can't believe how fast we were able to do that. And I think that it has changed people's mental models about what can get accomplished. The other thing we've seen is just an acceleration of climate change, and definitely on the West Coast, this is something that's been for real, whether that be something that you're experiencing personally with your teammates or something that your organization has chosen to address. But there is more changing in our organizations and work there, as well as a tipping point on social justice in the last 2 years. So much more has changed, and it is different now than I've ever seen in organizations, working to figure out how they're going to step up to answer what needs to change and what we want our organizations and our society and our communities to be. There's been a change in customer expectations. I've been telling this story recently that I chose to be in my car longer and go on a longer commute because I was able to order online from home before I left. Never before the pandemic would I have chosen to be in my car a little bit longer. But what I found was I was like, I want an easy experience. I want to know exactly what I've ordered and paid for and done. I can just pick it up. And I actually was sort of excited to be in my car a little bit longer and listen to a podcast. Things that I used to do in my commute that I'm not doing as much anymore. So we are absolutely changing what we expect and how we interact with the businesses that we use on a daily basis. And in doing that, I chose a business that that was further away from me and overstepped another business that I used to go to because it was closer to me and because of what they had in terms of their experience. And one thing more than anything that I think we're all talking about as change professionals and helping our organizations is the changing employee expectations. And we'll talk a bit about this and how to keep up on and all the things to consider around what is it changing and what we expect. There is so much here. Like just even today, I saw 2 new articles. It is almost impossible to keep up with the new articles and new content out there. We keep a long list, and it's well 70 plus over the last 3 to 4 months that we've just been like logging articles and research out there that we're seeing. Today's, I think I read, it was the Great Resignation to the Great Negotiation, which was an interesting idea around, like, you know, we're resetting what we want from our employers. And then to I quit, you quit, we all quit. It's not a coincidence. And this idea of it can get contagious. Any of these behaviors can start to get contagious. And with that, what I would say is, and we saw this a lot at the beginning of the pandemic, this idea of, and I love Winston Churchill's quote around never let a good crisis go to waste. There is a huge amount of opportunity right now for most organizations and individuals about choosing what they want for their lives and what works for them. But there's an incredible amount of risk as well. And we as change professionals are really set up to help our organizations more so than ever. More so than ever would I say organizations need their change professionals to really help. What we know is like the risk, there's huge risk of not seizing opportunities. And if anyone's got new research, I'd love to see it. The last research I can find is around 2019 and pre-pandemic. But what we knew is the average lifespan of companies used to be 60 years on the S&P 500. Pre-pandemic, it was down 10 years. Just paying attention to the news, you see M&A and acquisitions happening pretty rapidly. Even just this last week, several $billion, and Activision was acquired by Microsoft. Like really, there is so much happening, large and small, within private equity, as well as large corporations changing. And so what we know is, like, there is lots of opportunity for organizations and businesses, but there is also a lot of risk. And because of, like, the risk is, and this is something we as change professionals have to really, we know the good skills to be able to do this, but we all know that I know I personally said, when are we gonna get back to normal? I personally love being in front of a whiteboard with her. I'd rather be in a room with you all, have some flip charts and some stickies, you know, getting back to what we used to have, and, you know, kind of going back to record players and cassette tapes and discs here. But that idea of nostalgia and that idea of to try to control what you can and desire to stay the course, especially with so much changing. I don't think that there's ever been so much change in society and in business at the same time. So like even clear to the Industrial Revolution, and we're talking about it globally in every industry at the same time. Like it is a lot to take on and to be aware of what's happening. And really, so this is where I implore on you all to help your organizations. It is absolutely that time to push through the idea to self-protect. And a lot of times our executives want to stop and like, okay, let's just see how things settle out. But I would challenge, you don't have to change everything, but it is the time to stop and rethink your strategy, rethink how your business is operating, and rethink how your work is getting done. And there is so much changing right now. And as much, and I saw some others also missing whiteboards and flip charts, I also love Mural now, and Mural and Miro and all the fun whiteboarding tools. Like, I think we have learned a lot about how work can get done and how do we use both in this new world. And as change professionals, help our organizations and our leaders really adopt this, because I honestly believe more now than ever, we have to help our leaders and ourselves and others really become the humble, courageous leaders that we need to really have the courage to change. It is going to take a lot to really help make sure that we're setting up our organizations where employees thrive and customers want to and can engage for our companies to be healthy in the future. And I'm just sort of curious, as change professionals out there, and we're going to do polls later on in the presentation, but we can just use the chat now, like 1 to 5, 1 being not at all engaged in any of the changes happening in your organization. And I assume there's a fair amount of change happening, to 5, 1 very engaged and involved, to 3 kind of middle of the road. I'd just be curious if we could use the chat to get a sense of how engaged folks are. Some 5s, I love it. That's exactly where we want to see folks engaged. Involved. 5s, 4s, some 3s. That's great. Thank you. Yeah, then everyone's not engaged for the level they need to be. It'll be interesting to see the fatigue. I think that's a really good point. We were talking about, I was talking to a group actually in San Diego today about hiring, and they were talking about we're interviewing someone and it's quite apparent that they're already just burnt out. So I'm like, do they really want to leave the place that they are? And are they really about us, or is it that just they're fatigued and in the thick of it? And with that great resignation and the stop and just kind of like the movement around, it's important to stop and kind of think about that. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. One thing that we would say, and I think that most would say this, and you see it a lot in the research right now, is some version of hybrid is here to stay. And we'll talk a little bit about how to be a little bit more prepared for that. I would say more than ever, a focus on people and inclusivity, whether that be employees, customers, and partners, are really what going to shape the future of our work. And it's going to be evolving. So the idea that we're going to get it once and done, we're not going to be right. We're going to work to get it right. To misquote Brene Brown there's a lot that we need to be thinking about of this iteration, and having what sometimes agile becomes a bad word in organizations if it's not done well, as change has sometimes become a bad word, but that mindset of growth mindset and agility and continuing to evolve is going to be really important for our leaders as well as our organizations in the future. And there's a lot going on out there in the world in stats, and I like to pay attention mostly to the labor, most recently to the labor statistics that are coming out from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. There was something like 4.5 million people quit in November, and that is like kind of continuous. That's been it was 4.4 the month before, and 4.3. It just kind of continues to have grown more so than we have ever seen. And I just also read in the state of Oregon, there are more now open jobs than there are unemployed people. But still at the same time, there are people who have exited the workforce that I think have a pretty big impact on our organizations and the organizations that we want to create for the future. Something like 1.8 million women have left the workforce and have not returned yet. And I think it's going to take some time, some stability before in schools and things like that before we start seeing women coming back into that workforce. And as of right now, the latest research that I saw said 33% were still considering leaving. And with all of this, we're seeing, like, people are saying, I want hybrid and remote work. I read on my LinkedIn feed today a little gift that someone said, every time a CEO says he's talking about coming back to the office, my recruiter calls and I've hired 15 engineers in two months. And that's their recruiting strategy. They follow the companies that say you're not going to have a hybrid option or a remote option. So really kind of paying attention to what employees need and want in the future is going to be pretty important for us. And we know that there'll be some spectrum. We say that it'll be somewhere what we call anywhere from remote find to remote first. And most companies have not, where they started, it's not where they're finishing. And it's sort of fun to sort of watch how, whether utilizing their offices and when they're going to start utilizing their offices, or are they considering themselves a remote find or a fully remote company or somewhere in the middle. And really just the uncertainty of listening to their people and what they want and how many times, especially large organizations, have shifted and changed. So we're definitely seeing that, learning and listening and changing so that organizations can keep their people. When we stepped back, and I want to talk a little bit about the model that you guys that we utilize internally and that we use with our clients, and that I hope that will help give you a way of framing thinking about all the change that's happening, and how do I come back and look at it more consistently and making sure I'm thinking about all the things. To the point of Miro in the book, in the chat, when we were thinking about what is all happening in this landscape, we stepped back and we essentially created this massive mirror of what are all the things that we need to think about. And at the core, we were like, all right, no matter what we think about, we need to make sure that whatever our future is does keep a balance between what does our business need to be successful, what do our customers need, and what do our employees need. So there is that healthy tension. And in the center, and we talk about this navigation, we created this as a compass for us to sort of think about that. We will be course correcting. It's to the point of it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be a linear line. We're going to tick and tack and get there and do it what's right for every organization. And it's not going to look the same across. And when, like any good consultant, what we were doing is we started grouping all the things that we needed to think about and how often we might need to think about them in terms of what was changing in an organization. And there was just so many. We started grouping them together, and we saw a theme and a pattern here, and we created what we called the ETHOS model. And we're thinking about this in ETHOS being two things. One, actually ETHOS, every organization right now has the opportunity, and you all as change leaders in your organizations have the opportunity to really create the culture and the air and the spirit of beliefs and what you want your organization to be for the future. It is kind of this massive reset of how we're working and which ways we're working, and we have that opportunity to do so. And then, of course, we had to make it a bit of an acronym. So we'll dig in a little bit. There's dimensions behind each of the acronyms that we utilize when we're thinking about, okay, where do we need to focus? Because frankly, things are changing so fast, you need to focus quarterly almost on something different. And then we'll deep dive it with Julie and Ahad on two areas in which you can focus. So the first is the idea of engagement. So where do we engage and how do we engage and what ways should we be engaging our employees, our teams, and our customers, our talent. Like, do we have the right strategies for retaining and acquiring the top talent? The health and safety and well-being of our employees. If you weren't a high risk, high safety risk issue company, you probably weren't thinking about this as much as you're thinking about it today and creating policies around it today. Your operations and making sure that you're thinking about your processes so that you have you manage the risk out of your supply chain and other areas. And then the systems. More now than ever, we expect a very seamless systems experience from instant, I even find myself, who is not a digitally native person, who still prefers to take notes versus typing or writing in my computer. That if I don't have a really easy user interface, I get pretty frustrated. So what our customers are going to expect, what our employees are going to expect in the systems, in what we're calling the digital HQ, and I'll have Hod dig deeper into that in a minute. So with this larger view, what we did is sort of took that wheel and broke it down into all the things that we need to think about and just sort of asked a question. So what we can do on a quarterly basis is just ask, we have, the 25 or so questions that allow us to just stop and go, are we thinking about all the right things? Like in engagement, are our leaders really prepared to have lead hybrid meetings in an inclusive way? Can they do this so that it doesn't feel like this works right now because we're all flat screen. If 5 people are in a room, are you gonna feel left out? Can you do this in a way that's gonna work? How we created the systems and the processes from a talent equity standpoint that say, if you're choosing not to utilize the office as much, are you gonna have the same opportunities? Do you know, and are you tracking that? Are you able to report on that? You're getting the same promotions if you're not coming into your headquarters, your brick and mortar headquarters, versus if you're remaining remote. And wellness, with each delay of utilizing your offices and how long the pandemic's gone on, I've watched our organization, as well as most organizations, change their wellness and their benefits almost on a quarterly basis. And this is something that maybe was done yearly, like we relook at it. So this is something that is allows us to we ask the question, what's going on right now? Do we need to stop and take a look at this? All the operations and everything from your space. And when we think about what's coming next, are our meeting rooms even set up for good hybrid meetings? Should we have everything be remote meetings even if you're in the office, until our spaces get set up in the right way? And then in our systems, are we really set up in a way that allows us to experience all the things that we used to experience in our headquarters and how we used to engage? And I would say we're getting better, but we're not quite there. And we'll have a hot dig into that. So with that, the overview of where we are and what we're sort of thinking about, what I'd love to do is turn it over to Julie and have Julie dig into what we're seeing next and what we think is kind of coming next, and give us some tools and some guidance in what we can do and helping our organizations through some of the next change that's coming. And we believe that is how to manage in a hybrid way and how to lead in a hybrid way.
Awesome, Amelia. I am needing a thumbs up to make sure that I am sharing the right screen. Excellent.
Yes.
So I'm curious, before we move on, I'm not looking at the chat right now. Rudy, you're gonna have to tell me how this whole thing is going, because you are one of the very few faces that I can see. So if you're not into this, we're gonna fast forward or slow down. But I'm curious, Rudy, thanks, right, we're crushing it. Thanks, Rudy. So I'm curious if there are any folks that want to come off mute and ask any questions of Amelia before we get going, or if we just want to keep plugging through. We've got the time.
Just curious, Amelia, so you just said you connected with a few clients just recently, what, just big picture, every client's different, but what is really top of mind for them? What are their concerns as they're coming into this new year? Just some insights, especially if they're connected to, the topic that you've laid out.
Yeah, but, I think the two things, a few things that I'm seeing are more people are out sick than ever before. And that kind of surprised a lot of folks from the beginning of this year. So like people feel like we're still off to the races the way maybe we've been in like the high path, but more like with some of the turnover issues and then people being out sick because more people sort of experiencing luckily a lesser severe version of COVID, it is sort of putting a strain on and it's making it more real. And then with that, like most people have seen increases in their resignations and increases of that, like trying to figure out, okay, what is it that we need to be doing that really takes care of our people? I think that in like making sure that we have the right staff, because as people leave, the rest of the work doesn't really go away. And we all know that, right? We have to continue to do it. So that is something that we're hearing. And then like kind of the next is we're starting to hear about people like in HOD, and Julie will dig into this, around some of the tools and systems that they're starting to use to and invest in to make things a little bit easier and better. Some of these are like take a lot of thinking and work and actual change thinking to implement well. So you create the right culture and environment. And then last is the other thing that we're seeing a lot that I heard a few people talking to me about recently was around the like, okay, it's going to be real now. I actually had a hybrid meeting and I didn't like how that felt. It did, like, I felt like I was not in it. And now do I have to go downtown and be with my team to feel like I'm part of it if they're going to be at the office? So I think figuring out what hybrid is going to look like is going to be a real thing come this year. I'm curious if you've seen anything similar.
I agree with most of those trends for sure.
Yeah, I had a question on one of the things that you stated around if everyone just continues to be in hybrid mode, whether or not they're in the office or not. And the reason for that is I've always been a remote employee. So I've never been physically located in the last probably 20 years with other people that I'm actually actively working with. They've always been in other time zones. So to me, it's normal. But what are some of the struggles with the leaders or the facilitators or the folks who are leading these sessions to overcome that you think are kind of the big ticket items that we could help those leaders with?
Julie, do you want to take that as part of what you're digging into? I don't want to
Absolutely.
talk to you. Yeah,
Absolutely. I think that, you know, we've got a slate of some of the challenges. So if you could hold on just a minute, it's a wonderful transition to the next section.
Sure thing.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right.
Hi.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Hi, this is Jerry. Hi, Rudy. It's been a long time. I should come off camera, but I'm with a higher ed institution at the moment. And so I'm curious if you're seeing any differences in higher education as compared to more of the corporate, medium or small business type experience.
I can only have one or two references, not a lot of references. So if others have, I would love to hear others' perspective. One thing I hear in the education and in higher ed is there's actually more talking around burnout than, and Rudy mentioned it here, is like the burnout of leaders, and that is absolutely a real thing. But in the education system, just in general, and in people leaving the profession altogether, seems to be something that we're seeing a little bit more of. But I'd also be curious if others are seeing things that maybe we aren't.
I was just going to add, I think, you know, from a student perspective, you know, they are arguably the most able to do remote. I think what we have seen, though, is that the experience of being in higher education and not being present, that social aspect is part of the investment of students that they're making in higher education. And so this is anecdotal, I don't have the statistic, but there are many students simply leaving and saying, I'll try this again later. If I'm simply going to be a tile on a screen, this isn't what I was asking for. And so there is that movement toward, and preceding the pandemic, certainly to a gap year or investing in lower cost options if they're going to be doing remote work. So students aren't really into, and you know this probably, Jerry, more than anyone, they're not as into doing university from a dorm room. And of course, there's a broad spectrum of educational models, obviously, but that's the one that we're seeing, that the capability exists to do it, the desire to forego the social aspect of academia is not as compelling.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing anecdotally, but thank you for that.
Well, I can say even in the, I was a super big fan of distance learning, just because I got a great, insight into how my own children were doing in elementary school, but their grades were not so hot. And, they liked being in their jammies, but when they went back to school, their grades increased significantly in that social aspect. Although I wanted them to be safe and protect them, their grades have gone up significantly. They're just happier people. So, okay, enough of my anecdotes. Can I ask who asked the earlier question so I can make sure that we get to it?
Oh, the question about what we can do to help leaders?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is Shauna, sorry.
Shauna, thanks for teeing this up. And Rudy, you did a great job too. I think if we can move right along here, I think we're ready to do that with those, with those questions and comments. Really, one of the areas, the key focus for many companies is that priority around, as Amelia introduced the model, the engagement, the E, and talent. And so for the companies that we talk to, or we do have, although Amelia didn't speak to this, we have an ethos diagnostic that really helps companies. They take a survey assessment tool and identify where they have really invested time. Many in, certainly from early pandemic days, a lot of investment in collaboration tools and whiteboarding techniques, et cetera, or whiteboarding applications and platforms, but maybe not as much in how to help leaders and teams do their work or engage talent. And we aren't really ready in some of those areas. And as things change, that level of readiness certainly changes too. So while we're crossing our fingers for a post-pandemic future, everybody wants to go back to, I think we don't even call it normal anymore. Let's not attempt, but there's clearly disruption in the way that we do work, and that may be irreversible. We know that it's spread across that hybrid spectrum that Amelia talked about earlier, from on-site to hybrid to fully remote. Part of the question is, how do we advance our own thinking and our skill set to adapt to the new level of work or new type of work? All right. So no matter where you and your teams do their work, there's a huge chance it's going to be distributed across place and time. And so we have, as Amelia alluded to, a huge ecosystem of partners and customers and vendors and employees, and how they work together to adapt and thrive in a hybrid world of work. So the jury may be out on how and when we may be working beyond this year, but we really have to prepare for a very different future because of that broader ecosystem. We don't know where our customers may be. We may adopt an in-person or remote for our organization, but that doesn't mean our vendors or our clients or our partners adopt that same model. And so the job of every leader is to really ensure that the business or the organization continues to be innovative, that customers are supported, and that employees are really engaged and adequately supported. We want them to be a part of our organization long into the future, but that is an incredibly daunting task for many of the reasons that are on this screen right now. And I won't belabor that because Amelia talked to many of those points, but I think we we've adapted to learn in a remote or virtual world, but a hybrid world is a whole different deal. And it's a whole different chapter with very different demands. And so we'll walk through those. My goal is to make sure that we cover most of this content. And my hope is that most of it isn't new, but it's maybe a new application of some of the tools we already have in our toolkit. So while it's hard to prepare for something that's so uncertain, it's pretty clear that this is a moving transformation. And as change practitioners, you know that like all major transitions or transformations, you'll need a new mindset and a skill set and a toolkit to really be effective and engaged in a hybrid model and flexible way of work. And so while you may not be part of the team that is driving that transformation, it's just going to be part of the DNA that you'll need from a mindset perspective, really adopting a learner's mindset. It's a crucial part of adapting to the new world of work and helping us to adapt and be responsive to the needs of others. In skill set, we'll need to learn how to lead and grow distributed teams with varying needs and preferences. We can't mandate everything. That people can go elsewhere. We know that. And really, in terms of the practical tools, technology tools, that's just the beginning. But we do need to build that toolkit. So harnessing the power of really actionable resources, and hopefully, again, some of them are already in our tool belt. But these need to begin to be the way that we better understand and collaborate with our people to create experiences that inspire them. And, you know, this isn't the job of the employee experience team. You know, if we want to keep our people, we need to be more adaptive than we really ever have before, with the exception being the pandemic, right? But my hope is that these practical approaches are things that change managers and leaders are so good, and not just using themselves, but using throughout the changes and the organizations that they're working with. So I hope for this this short session that we have together to really be practical, focused on, so what do we do about it? I mean, you know, we're sharing a lot of the very quickly changing reality, but, you know, how do we be effective and not overwhelmed? And while I can't say that we have the silver bullet, we do have some really practical approaches to help managers and leaders and teams really get after this that hopefully can be really helpful. So the new imperatives for leaders, Amelia talked about it, it's dead on. In an ever-changing world, it's really about courageous leadership and the courage to grow and change. And so that's a piece that we've been talking about for a long time in terms of leadership, but it's really a mandate. And so those business-centric leadership practices just aren't enough. They're not enough to move into the future. It's really embracing a human-centered leadership approach that allows us to learn skills, new skills, become more open, and really become apprised, as Amelia was talking about earlier, to the shifting needs of our teams and the industry and our talent. And so how do we become students and learners as well? Enabling this kind of a meaningful change and adapting to the workforce really is something that begins with empathy. And during the pandemic, being an empathetic leader has been essential and mandatory. And for the first time, it was okay and required to really check in and understand our people. And so we learn to appreciate and acknowledge and ask about their circumstances where that may not have been okay before. And so when we saw them at the kitchen table or with their dog or their kids, you know, it became essential to really connect with them on a different level. And so we learned what it's really about to radically care for our people, not just their performance and their progress, but their personal needs and their well-being, and to enable a new level of work, a new type of work into this new, you know, horizon, if you will. That really matters in terms of leadership. It is an expectation of people moving forward. Next, inclusivity. Intentional inclusivity is really no longer the job of the DEI team, right? In the future of work, it's everybody's job to ensure that those, you know, that our tiles on the screen feel as connected to us as those that may be in the office next door. And, you know, we've all learned how to be a part of a digital world, but arguably that was equalizing, right? Everybody's a stale or a static tile, maybe not stale, static tile on a screen. But what about when some are at the table next to us and others are on the screen? And how do we deal with the risks of proximity bias or unequal access? You know, how do we make sure that we empower our teams with the aptitude and the ability to really facilitate real conversations and to reach out in an appropriate way to those that are disengaged or marginalized? And so these aren't really nice to haves anymore, especially when most of our organizations are talking about fairness and equity at the same time. And so this is really, again, expectations. And then listening and learning, this is really last, and it sounds fairly sing-song, right? Listen and learn. We know this is change practitioners. What's different is that we have skills for leaders throughout our organization. We're good listeners and we're typically good learners as well, but we need to help leaders design intentional methods or for our organizations to conduct employee listening and increase our understanding and adaptation. And so again, Amelia stole my thunder, but the pace of the annual survey and employee focus group isn't really enough to monitor and be responsive to employee signals and needs for feedback. And so if we really want to create inspiring, exciting environments and experiences for our teams, we're really going to need to listen and learn. Again, you don't have to be right, but you have to really work to get it right. And so that needs to be infused, not just in our change projects, but in our leadership development as well. And so that openness and appetite for changing and growing those competencies and maybe different muscles is really increasingly important as well. All right. Okay, so when we look at enabling teams, this is really the skill set. A lot of us have looked at, you know, a slew of new technologies. And 2 years ago, we were like, oh my gosh, this is not the experience that I need or that I want. And in a virtual world, we've, you know, connection and collaboration have been hard. But I think what we've also found is that our teams have been really resilient. And they've adopted a new slate of tools and technology along the way. And so we've done everything from replicate the water cooler, although I crack up with this, like, is there a water cooler anymore in these organizations? You know, we've used collaboration platforms to be social. We've designed all hands and really brought people together. And we've hosted happy hours and we've seen each other's furry friends. And I would argue we have become more humans. And so while it's not the same as, you know, the old environment where you could say, hey, do you have a minute? We are seeing that connection is really important. And so our employees want flexibility, but they don't want to compromise connection or engagement. And so how do we deliver on that? So I would say that again, there's no silver bullet, but the reality is that this is a new era of experimentation, and it's a lot to take in. And we need to figure out how do we help our teams build the skills for that hybrid environment, and how can we increase their success? And so here's a list of, you know, very fundamental questions, but they merit consideration when we talk about how ready a team is to engage. And so again, these will be part of the handout, so I don't want to drain this. But it is a question for what is our method for forming and running a hybrid team? How will we decide when to gather in person? How can you and your team enable greater transparency? This is one we're talking about a lot. Transparency seems like goodness. Well, you know what? It's not binary. And so what's the spectrum? What is going to be transparent versus a distraction? You know, and what conversations are going to be public? How will you be inclusive and equitable, just like I was talking about before? And so, you know, how will you reach out to those that are quiet in not just in a virtual meeting, but in a hybrid meeting? How will you, I used to laugh, it used to be like, Does anybody on the phone have questions? Okay, great. We'll keep moving on, right? Like that was not a good experience when some were on the phone and could not be seen and some were in the room. And so this is just replicating that or even magnifying it. And that's where we need to do better. And do we have the technology tools we need to succeed? Again, we have the technology tools for everyone to be remote. You know, are your organizations taking a look at what technology tools will be utilized and what those general norms will be around how do you engage people in a hybrid meeting or hybrid teams that are working, you know, whether it's 2 days a week, 3 days a week, or whatever that model looks like. And do they have the technology tools not to just be remote, but to be hybrid? And that's something that AHA's going to talk a little bit more about in just a few minutes. So this is not, again, the silver bullet, but here are 5 practical ways that you can prepare yourselves and help other leaders become more prepared and to navigate. And so we created what we call the hybrid teaming toolkit, and it offers templates and deeper dives to help leaders, you know, really guide through these changes. And so these are a few of the accelerators that you and your teams can use to get a jump start on some of the new demands that you may be facing as you launch and activate hybrid teams. My hope is that these are not all new tools, but let me walk through them and let you know that in the blue here, we've got the actual tool. You'll get as a part of the follow-up, the actual toolkit, which gives you the template that is identified here. And I'll give you a snapshot if we have enough time. I think we're doing okay on time. So let me just walk through these. I mean, again, there are probably more tools, but you know, in the interest of being practical, not exhaustive, these are some of our favorites. And again, some of them are pretty straightforward, but we hope that they can be super useful. So let's start with team norms. Team norms, as many of you and hopefully all of you know, these are really the drivers of culture and the employee experience. They're how a team interacts, prioritizes, how they hold people accountable. They can be logical or aspirational, but they're consciously creating specific, making the implicit explicit, and that can reduce friction and greatly improve team alignment. So, you know, the question around which teams will be in person, which will be remote, how will you make decisions? How will you collaborate on new ideas? I'm sure that some of these are not unfamiliar. Most remote teams have said, we're not gonna send emails after 8 o'clock at night. You don't have to be on, you know, have meetings during the workout, you know, during the lunch hour, those kinds of things. The question is, how will you really manage personal preferences, again, when they may be very diverse in nature, and how will you make sure that those are responsive to your client and your team needs? So our team norms tool here will help you design team norms as a team. It's got a set of questions and post them where they're visible to all, and hopefully you'll revisit them pretty regularly. Again, many organizations have team norms for remote teams, but we got to reset entering a hybrid world. Number 2, getting the hybrid meeting right. This is about resetting why and when you gather, especially if you have the option for gathering in person. And so this is really being intentional about the types of team collaboration. So being pretty diligent in preparing and firming up the purpose for your meeting, super important. This means this includes considering whether the meeting outcome can be achieved via Teams chat or an email or a separate sync. Does it require the same meetings that we had before? Clearly communicating the meeting expectation for all attendees. And again, you know, leaders are often very loose. They get everybody on the line, get everybody in the meeting. And when we have to make decisions potentially around when to gather in person, it requires a lot more upfront preparation, especially if that is if that decision needs to be agreed upon by a team that is choosing to gather. So really aligning on those expectations of not just when you'll meet, but how you'll ask questions, how you'll democratize the conversation, how you use the whiteboard, and then really allocating some time to each and every meeting to say, how's this working for everybody? How's this going? You know, thumbs up, Roman vote, whatever it may be. Moving right along. The third one, know your employee personas. For change leaders, this is part and parcel of what you do in change impact analysis and what you do in a major transition. But you know, helping every leader to really understand the different preferences and the archetypes, if you will, and segmenting their own teams into personas and populations really helps them understand, you know, where their models and their mechanisms are going to work for everybody and where they're not. So as a leader, really understanding those unique needs and values, aspirations. We have a template for developing employee personas, as well as a personal canvas that helps individuals identify what their preferences are, when they prefer to work, how they prefer to work, and really whether remote or in-person is working for them. And again, for many of your organizations, some of this work has been done. But I think part of this is adapting some of those change management or agile change tools to a broader application wherever we can and how we work, not just when we're driving or leading change. And thinking about this whole entry into the new horizon of work as a change unto itself. The next one, number 4, is coaching hybrid leaders. We have a package that makes it really easy to walk leaders through essential and crucial conversations, but the role of the manager is fundamentally changing. Many of them do not have the tools that they need to do this kind of work, and they're the employee's connection to the organization. They drive organizational culture, and so they have traditionally been incentivized and focused on making sure that teams have high productivity and performance. And now their job really shifts to make sure that they're adapting to the different values and understand their employee needs. So we need to help them learn new techniques for managing, common techniques for managing hybrid teams and engaging employees. And that may not be the skill set. So that adaptation of the using those personal canvases, learning more about your employee personas, and really kind of looking at preparation and coaching as a thing for all leaders. They know how to manage, they know how to lead people, but do they know how to do it in this way? And I think that some of the tools that we can offer can be helpful in that way as well. It really focuses on 3 crucial conversations to balance the needs of the people and their teams in the organization. And last, I've been talking for a really long time. So last, it's really about driving retrospective. So many of us know the tool of retrospective, and it's as easy as coming together to celebrate what's working well, what needs improvement, and questions around how we can work better together. Making that intentional time and creating that space as leaders, again, not just as change agents, but really making sure that we're allocating that time and space to check in with our teams, see if there's any new ideas, what we can be doing better. And you see, hopefully you see that these 5 approaches and these practical tools really work together to get after the mindset and the skill set that we're hoping for tomorrow's teams and leaders. So I want to leave you with just a quick snapshot. You know, at the end of the day, we want our people to see themselves in our organization now and long into the future. And we want our teams to feel connected and be able to engage easily. To do that, we need to emerge as innovative and prepared leaders and be capable of guiding our teams through uncertain and evolving waters. And so this is a snapshot of the toolkit. You'll be able to download this. This will be sent to you. But my hope is that these will be a practical set of how-tos that you can share with your own leaders. You know, we're obviously happy to help you apply them. But again, not overthinking the uncertainty and being overwhelmed, but really trying some tools and experimenting, building that experimental muscle to see how you can prepare and lead your leaders and your teams into the future. And as change leaders, you do that all the time. So with that, we're gonna pass over to, actually, are there any questions? I haven't seen the chat. Rudy, are there any questions in the chat? No, I'm just kidding. Do you have, does anybody have any questions? You're the only wonderful face that I can see. So I'm curious if anyone has any questions. And Sean, I'm hopeful that that may have addressed your question.
There's lots of love on the chat for you and team.
One question that was brought up, which I thought was a great question by Alpha Diallo, was would you address the safety aspect or how to raise any concerns from the team? Would that possibly be in the retrospectives? Aha did chime in, but I also wanted to see if you also had any other input on that too, Julie.
Yeah, Haji, it was a question more about personal safety and well-being in a remote environment or in an in-person environment.
Sure.
This is a thought.
Yeah.
I think I can speak about it. It was more from a remote perspective, but more in a hybrid environment in terms of, how do you make sure that some people may not feel comfortable sometimes in a hybrid environment, or they may not feel safe in that environment, and how they are able to enable raising the concern or something like that. And that could be to the check-in meetings, I think, with the retrospective, but I was thinking that retrospective is kind of later in the game. I'm thinking of maybe in the middle or maybe earlier on, if you can identify that would be able to support the team along the way. So I was just curious how to address that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Alpha, I'm glad you brought that up. There's a tool in the toolkit called the personal canvas, and that becomes kind of a lightweight way to learn. It's a series of questions for the employee, and you can certainly adapt it to, what's your level of comfort with in-person meetings, as an example, and really having everybody on your team fill that out and share with each other, because it may seem like there's a right answer from an employee standpoint. Certainly when you have a connection and a relationship that is built on trust, and you have that connection or relationship with an individual, it becomes easier to ask those questions. And if it's not that, or let's say you're taking on a new team, having everybody fill out that personal canvas, which is like, what's my own situation? How comfortable am I? Nobody wants to be the person that says, I don't want to do in person. I know in our organizations, my mother lives with us. I was very reticent to do that. But if my team said that they wanted to go do a thing, I felt uncomfortable, voicing that. But I did, because my own leader understood what my preferences were. And so I felt like I had already had that question. So the onus wasn't on me to say, you know what, I'm not really down with that. So I think it can be twofold. One is making sure that, you're really doing those check-ins on regular basis. As a team, the retrospective, absolutely. And third, I think maybe upfront, and this can be in setting the team norms. This is an inform of the team norms, setting up that personal canvas. So it's, everybody feels like, well, everybody's doing it. I'm going to, address my personal preferences here, and then being able as a leader to follow up on that and say, can you tell me more about this? But it's not like a one-on-one that says, are you scared or are you not scared? It doesn't have to be a threatening thing. It can be something that everybody shares amongst them to develop the team norms. So thanks for that question. I hope that helps, but check out personal in the toolkit.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thanks for the response. That's really great.
Sure thing.
Alpha, thank you for asking that question. That was really helpful. We do have another question from Holly as well too. How do you assess utilization of these tools? Is there a goal for standardizing norms, etc.? And then the follow-up would be also if you've been able to determine if utilization of these tools have influenced engagement, productivity, or job satisfaction in any way.
That's a great question. I would say that that's a really big question. So let me attempt to answer from a metric, a data-driven decision making around which tool is the most valuable. We don't have a sense for how they've been applied with our clients. When we've used them, we can tell you from an anecdotal perspective with our clients, we have received not only really good feedback in something like a team norms or retrospective, but I would say that's not something that we just do internally. We do it with our clients. And what we do is we uncover how they're doing, how they're feeling about the work that we do, rather than in the annual survey, any surprises. And so while those are not quantitative, those are high value targets. If you can get your client to say, this isn't working, I wish we would go this direction, because you've conducted a retrospective, that's really high value. So while I don't have the stats to say which one of these is increasing productivity, I do know that they're increasing satisfaction, because on every single one of these, and Amelia or Ahad, you're welcome to jump in, every single time what each of these tools is designed to do is to make implicit, below the radar, we've all seen the culture iceberg, right? It's taking what's below the water and it's putting it up there, giving people language and asking questions that create richer conversations. And so I think that's the value in any one of these tools. But no, I don't have the stats to tell you how we've applied those. It's just too broad to be able to do that. Amelia, any sense for that? Or do you share that experience?
Get off mute for a second there. Yeah, I would say that they end up being adopted in our clients. Like, you come back a year later and they're still utilizing them. So it is something that becomes part of what they do. I like the question around, do you ever get pushback if these take too much, or if it reduces time and it's not effective? These are one of those things that I think it's all about how you set anything up. If you tell someone you're going to do something with them or on them, it can feel overwhelming. But if how you're doing work is to, hey, it's part of our intro, as part of our getting to know one another, we're going to do this activity. And it's not that you can do these things, and by adding 15-20 minutes to a meeting, and it doesn't have to take over. It's not like you leave for a day to do a thing. The best way to do this is they incorporate into your everyday rhythms of what you're doing in your team meetings. So with that, I think we should probably push it over to Ahad's.
Absolutely.
I think we're running low on time.
Yep, I'll just quickly add that, when I've personally implemented all of these different tools in the toolkit, and I would say, if I was to give anecdotally, what are the most important ones, I would, especially with teams, I would say retro often, retro with teams of teams. Reason being is, and you can do this in small slices, right? If you haven't started doing this with business teams, typically technology teams are doing this, but doing it on the business side of the house is actually really valuable for those feedback loops. And speaking of feedback loops,
can I say one more thing, Ahad? I just want to enter really, really quickly. Here's one thing to try. If somebody hasn't done this before and they're skeptical, we're entering an age of experimentation. We're going to experiment with this. Let's try new things. And if they don't work and they don't land, or they take too much time, just give me one time. And that's what that experimentation muscle is, what we're trying to really breed. So I would really encourage you, Vera and Kim, really adopt that sort of experimentation. And there's very few leaders that don't like a good experiment, but I could be corrected on that. But really push forward and say, let's take the lens of, let's try something different.
Thank you so much, Julie. And I've heard you give some of this feel, and Amelia, you too, but hearing it in this capacity and with this team, I'm really grateful to hear y'all talk about this. And again, grateful for the time we have together. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here and kind of get on the presentation view. Can you all see it okay? Awesome.
Yep.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah. So we've talked about.
We just lost the audio.
Isn't that funny how that works? We've talked about
We're good.
Awesome. Thank you, Rudy. We've talked about the overall framework of ethos, and then we've gotten into the toolkit and the hybrid leaders toolkit. Something that Amelia touched on earlier is the S in ethos, right? The systems component. How do we handle the S in ethos? And one of the discoveries we made as we were thinking about the S in ethos was that, and I'll get into it, right? the S consists of all the knowledge sharing, the collaboration, the listening and feedback, and the productivity systems that we have in place. And so when we talk about the S, we made this kind of realization that that really includes all of this digital headquarters, right? All of what we think about it from a digital headquarters. So if we jump in and look at slide 1 as an example, right? What happens in a physical headquarters, right? If someone mentioned water cooler earlier, that was funny, right? Water cooler conversations, or cafe, right? You might get coffee together at a headquarters. You see people, you get feedback from visual feedback loops. Amelia's pointing whiteboard. Gosh, I have a whiteboard in my office right over there. There's sticky notes right over here, right? We love that kind of, as humans, as tribal humans, we love this interaction. Questions to y'all in the audience. What happens as a physical headquarters? Throw it in the chat, and that's why I'm not going on a presentation. I don't want to see the chat. I want to see your faces. So I'd rather, if you want to get on camera. So here in the chat, we have some things. Yep. As we go forward, feel free to jump into the chat, because as we get into it, right? Things at the physical headquarters, we think about it, employee experience, right? And what the experience of that employee is in a physical space or a digital space is now the responsibility of every company leader. And there's a lot of text on this slide, and I'm not going to read it all off, but there was some questions around statistics and some of the research in this space, and we have some sources for all of these things. But if you just start looking at this list, it becomes kind of palpable, right? 20% of companies say that they're never going to go back into the office, and 4 out of 10 employees are leaving or are at risk of leaving if they don't have the option to be hybrid. And so technology and systems, figuring this space out and how to do this, what we used to do physically, digitally, is now the combined responsibility of every company leader. And it shouldn't matter of the medium, right? Physical, in person, virtual, hybrid, to all those points, it shouldn't matter. And in truth, we've seen in the pandemic how much business value has been driven and how much productivity has happened. With that being said, the people are still, generally speaking, you're seeing a lot of burnout and unhappiness. And I have another slide that's not in here right now. It didn't transfer over, but when it comes down to it, the top 10 factors for why employees leave organizations, we're talking about compensation, burnout, pay equity, and then you're talking about things like not having the option for flexibility from work from home options, and not having connections with people. So when we think about these things, employee experience, point number 1, it becomes the responsibility of every leader, right? Not just business, not just technology, not just HR, not just change leaders, every leader, number 1. Number 2, we've seen this correlation across a variety of different studies for years now, that a positive employee experience is not just good for talent retention, but it also leads to an improved customer experience, which in turn leads to higher revenue and customer satisfaction, right? Bottom line. This is a chart from the IDC, and you're seeing here that a large amount of impact is given to the correlation between customer experience and employee experience. So you put those things together, and you think about, okay, what if employees and also partners and customers all had a place where systems and tools and processes did these 4 things on the right? They enabled people to do their work with less friction. They streamlined access and knowledge sharing. They made relentless teaming. Love that word, relentless, right? It's an Amazon word. It's a Slalom word. A lot of people love the word relentless. And then you empowered listening and feedback through systems. And so that place is the digital headquarters. And so if we were to visualize this in kind of one page, right? You have the people at the center, and then you have their work, their career, their self, and their culture, and all the different things that different people need from their work. And then organizationally, it has to be accessible. Work has to be accessible. It has to be relevant. It has to be frictionless. It has to be secure from a technology perspective. And that all bubbles up to these 4 dimensions, right? But at the end of the day, it's not about the technology. It's about how technology influences and impacts and shapes the modern work experience. To all the points that were laid out by Amelia, and then again reinforced by Julie, the people are at the center of this, and how do you figure out how you can make the technology work for those people? So we may ask, for example, a series of questions to gauge you on your journey overall from, aware to integrated, and this kind of imagine this like a maturity model. And we can ask a series of, hey, where is a particular client or customer or organization or business unit in their journey to adopting a digital headquarters? Are you measuring success of your systems and how they're working for your people? Do you have guardrails in place? And then back to the ways of working, right, from what Julia was mentioning earlier, how easily can you navigate that digital headquarters in response to with your physical headquarters? And then finally, how do you just view this thing that we all do all the time as an enterprise, looking at Zoom and Microsoft Teams and Slack and ServiceNow and we can kind of, all of us can go on. How do you look at that whole ecosystem of tools and systems holistically? You're looking at them like individual tools, chat tools, or video conferencing tools? Are you looking at them more as a holistic enterprise architecture enabled plan with integrations and automations? I mean, these are the things that I think a lot of folks are, as to Amelia's earlier point, are struggling with. And so I'm just curious, and I want to have this more of a conversation, right? Thinking about, some questions for you, right? And I have a series of kind of 4 questions. It's very small here. You're going to get them in Zoom, in a Zoom poll. I'm really interested to see where everyone's at in their digital HQ journey from their personal organizations, right? 4 questions really around, one's around productivity, one's around knowledge management, knowledge sharing, one's around feedback, and one's around tools in collaboration. So Haji, you can flick that, there you go. And we're gonna get some responses in real time. We'll give it about a minute or so for folks to respond. And I know it's super small, I apologize. And while y'all are answering those questions, right? Oh, got our first couple of responses in. I wanted to just kind of have some guiding questions for us to respond to here.
I just have one observation. It seems, as I look at the questions and the way you set this up, it came to mind that it seems that what was explicit back then, before pandemic, has become implicit, and what was implicit has become explicit. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, the water cooler, that was explicit. You knew where the water cooler was, you can have a conversation over there, you can grab a coffee. But now those don't happen now because well, let me say that differently. You think they don't happen, but I think it's still happening. It's just happening differently. Like, for instance, the chat. People chat now a lot on conversation during a meeting. That was something that you never did before because you were paying attention to the screen or you were having a conversation with someone. But now you have those underlying conversations that are happening. And if you're not part of that, you feel like you're missing something out. So I feel like it's like we still have the same processes in place. It's just we have to look at it differently, right? It's like what was explicit, you knew where it was. Now it's like underlying implicit, and you have to figure out how to access that. And I think as managers, yeah, because I was looking at the questions and I'm looking at everything that you're setting up, and it's like, well, maybe I just need to look at differently. Maybe it's like an inverted world, and think differently in terms of how do we approach that? Because I think now it's how do you guide now the employer and the clients? How do we guide them to kind of figure that out for them, right? And where it is, and then how to make it explicit again for some people.
And just to add, I mean, I think it's a wonderful thought, right? And just to add, how do you make that equitable, right? How do you enable an experience where everyone can have the sidebar conversations and access and all these things? Because some people, again, just imagine this generational divide that you might have with comfort of tools and just the chat functions in themselves and having asynchronous conversations. I've sent Amelia videos, like asynchronous videos in the past couple of weeks, and she's like, this is brilliant, we have to do this more. But that's kind of the Snapchat or Marco Polo or Instagram or whatever generation where you're comfortable sending those 60-second, 30-second clips of yourself talking off script, not really thinking about much, just kind of stream of consciousness thing. If you don't have that comfort with the tools and the systems, you can't do that, right? So to your point, it's implicit versus explicit, which I love. And then there's so many pieces to unpack in there as well, right? Regarding, gosh, the generational equity that we have to deal with, the issues with when you're having sidebar conversations in a very critical meeting, and it undermines the presenters or the team who's presenting's objectives because you're basically sabotaging all of this. There's a lot of that can happen. So we've ended the poll, and interestingly, right, let's go question by question, one through four. So how capable are your organization's productivity applications? It looks like 45% of y'all had, widely adopted, integrated, leading edge, enterprise grade productivity tools. Very cool. I'm very excited about that. About half said you have a range of tools, and they can vary by teams, right? Let's go down here into knowledge management. It looks like about half of the folks said they're actually, again, the highest level, right? So information, knowledge, and securely, their rework is limited. So very good. That's definitely a kind of a leading edge there. How about the question number 3, which is, again, another very similar distribution. So regular employee listening and feedback mechanisms in place, about 55% of y'all, versus the yearly type of, monthly or yearly or never type of deal. And then finally, how integrated are your collaboration tools? So you have in-person, virtual, hybrid. Again, I'm with a group of change practitioners. I'm really glad to see that there's pretty, relatively good engagement with that from a tooling perspective. But I wanted to ask y'all, the audience, what do you all think from some of the results of the survey? And then, after listening to some of the insights, I'm just curious, what aspects of the digital headquarters, and we can go back in some slideware and look at it, do you think you need to prioritize? What was illuminating, or does it land? Does it stick? Does it resonate? Curious.
I'm curious, Ahad, this is Anka. If you see in your observations, in your research, do you see correlation or causation between those various aspects in the levels of maturity?
Very good question. Very good question. In fact, it's a good enough question that it makes me want to find a slide real quick. I will actually bring up, this is something that I was reading out very recently. This is the Institute for Corporate Productivity Slalom support. We work with this organization. Overall, I'm just going to go directly to the source. I can go ahead and close or minimize that for now. I'm going to open this report. And so the 10 factors driving talent loss, that's kind of what we were talking about earlier. And someone mentioned, I'm like, ooh, let me look at this report, because I think I have an answer, but I held it back for this part of the conversation. It's tough to say, right? And I'll say that's kind of the high level. These things are not well measured today. And one of our approaches for how to fix this, Anka, is actually to go and measure something that we're kind of thinking about as a culture index. How are you measuring the culture of your organization? And then how are you measuring the business impact of your digital HQ? And I have a visual to show you. Before I get there, though, I do want to call this one out, right? Burnout is the #1 factor. Why? And this is not out of 100%. This is one of the reasons people cite for leaving. Here's one that's interesting, right? Requiring employees return to workplace after working remotely. It's 34% of the respondents say they would literally leave rather than return in person. How about this one over here? Employees' sense of social disconnect from workers through the year of remote work, right? Same thing here, disengagement, not offering flexible work options. So I would say it's difficult in its nature to measure some of these things, like number of meetings you have, or in terms of, and actually I can show a kind of a template dashboard that I'm working on literally as of today, if I can find it quickly. I don't want to bore you all looking for slides. But that being said, I do think there's something to the notion of measuring it, because we are not doing it well today, right? So if I can find a quick view of this real fast, right there, right? So imagine being able to quickly, and I'll wireframe this out for you all so you can see it, quickly being able to take a glance and look at a culture impact, culture measurement, right? As change practitioners, how helpful would it be for y'all to be able to look at how people are doing from a cultural base, and then from a digital HQ perspective, how many hours are people spending in deep work, meaning focus time? How many meeting hours are you taking, day over day over day? How about messages and email versus direct messages versus channel, or if you have a thread? Same thing with daily active users, channel activity, customer interactions. There's a lot that you could start to measure here, but it's on the onus of the organization to do that. And I think very few people today are doing it in a holistic way. Any other questions or insights or thoughts? Ananka, did I answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I love that slide. And I think that, well, there's two things, right? Burnout being burnout, because all of those other things underneath burnout contribute to the burnout.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And that is, and then there's the question of when people are leaving, are they even being asked why they're leaving?
Right.
Because in a lot of organizations, they don't even ask.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of that employee listening piece, right? Can you systematize some of those things so that when you are leaving, you get a pulse survey and you basically through an automated process of, okay, now that you're leaving, you don't have to wait for somebody to send you a meeting invite. This is all created automatically, right? You're basically going to get a meeting invite. The things are going to get triggered in your HRM. You're going to have the integrations to your other systems of work. And you're going to have this really nice, actually, exit experience, because as we know, talent is revolving quite a bit. So Sean and I love that notion a lot.
Yeah, the other thing I would touch upon is the comfort level of some of our quote unquote senior leaders to do some of those things that you called out on the previous slide. Yep. Get up, be authentic, get on camera, talk and present.
Yep.
And they don't have a good comfort level with that. And because of that, they sometimes don't do it or they delegate it, which then kind of reduces the impact when you are trying to get engagement from some of the other areas of the organization, because they're not walking the talk.
Without a doubt. Some of those generational divides, and some of the model behavior, over here we call out, in the most equitable way possible. Well, equity is it's a huge topic area. And I think, so as Julie said it earlier, right? Equity is not the job of the HR organization anymore. It has to happen in the day-to-day work of teams and leaders and teams of teams and people that are working on the ground and, everyone in between, right? And just the ability to use a tool and then they say, okay, we're going to actually, and that's part of what we're saying for ways of working, right? So the tools are there, but are the norms and things are adopted across the organization organizationally? How we use these tools and how they work together, is that something that we all can stick to? I know that every organization I've ever worked with has challenges with that. What else comes to mind? I know we're almost at time, folks, and I want to make sure to have Amelia close this out, but any last questions?
I think the last piece around what you just discussed around how to make the leaders comfortable, to me, I think it's really key, because without the leaders, you cannot do much happening down below. And then you have to get them on board, you have to get them ready, you have to get them comfortable. And the comfort piece to me is the most difficult piece, I would say. And I'm just curious, quickly, if you had ideas about, how do you bring them comfortable, or how do you bring them to the point where they feel they can lead this confident and without feeling, because I feel like it's the elephant in the room that we didn't talk about before. Yeah. Now we talk about it.
Oh yeah.
And we have to address it. And that becomes now where the criticality of it is so tense.
And so I could talk about this one for a minute, right? But I'll summarize with two things. I think leaders are quick to empower these tools to their workforces. And I would say the younger generations, your Gen Zers and your millennial, your younger millennials are using these tools at a pretty incredible rate. So you can look at a very simple use case like pay equity at Apple, right? Using Slack. And I don't know if you all have, as change practitioners, it's a good story for you all to know about, right? So Apple, very famous top-down company, they just turned Slack on for everybody to use, as an example. And they didn't really think about ways of working. And they didn't really think about, guardrails and guidelines and all these things that we're discussing now. And it came to the point where they're discussing, pay equity in a very public and open forum, in a very public way, digitally, right? Where leaders aren't necessarily comfortable with that conversation happening. And it makes its way to Twitter and The Verge, and there's podcasts about it, and it's discussed at a global level. So this super private company is now having its internal politics discussed at a global level. how as an organization are you going to be able to say, leader, like I said, it's not, I'm not just saying this to be an alarmist. Employee experience is the responsibility of every company leader. Like that message needs to be said again and again and again and again, because the leadership needs to understand that like the entirety of ethos. And like we said, this systems component, digital HQ, is the S in ethos, right? I need to reinforce that again and again. It's one component of this wheel, and they are all interacting together, right? So you cannot talk about listening and feedback and productivity without talking about connection and talent and equity, right? There are one conversation. It's so overwhelming to talk about all of it that you have to take it out in pieces. So I think that's a great wrap, and I'll have Amelia, you can kind of bring us home.
Yeah, thank you, Hud, and thank you, Alpha, for that question. It occurs to me a couple things. You know, there's a lot going on in the world right now, and with all the change, it does make especially leaders that aren't comfortable with it want to not do it, right? And I think there's been like your question to that point, and how do you get them there? Sometimes, like, unfortunately, sometimes pain gets folks there. So using the idea of what's happened in terms of resignations and like some of the things that are happening in organizations, like, hey, we have to turn the tide. And then the other is really working with this idea of, this is experimentation. You don't have to be right. You have to be committed to getting it right. And that's all you have to say. Like, we're going to try some new things and we're going to experiment. And I might not get it all right. So many people, like a leader can, like coaching a leader to say that will help, like, and most leaders will do that and follow along. And like you start small, practice on something, and like they're more willing to trust you to continue on and keep going. So with that, like, I know we took up a good portion of the time, and we wanted to, and I want to really thank you for engaging in the conversation, asking questions, using the chat. We love this content. We really want organizations to be better. We want our people to love where they work, live and work, and it's important to us. It's part of who we are, and thank you for the opportunity to allow us to share that. And if you need anything, please let us know. We'll send you out. We'll send out to ACMP our PDFs, and you can download away, and hopefully they'll help you in the future.
Awesome. Thank you, Amelia. Well, that pretty much concludes our second session here today. Thank you so much again for all the engagement, the questions, phenomenal interactions from everyone here. And thank you again, Slalom, for sponsoring us and for the amazing topic as well, too. There was a ton of praise in the chat for all the tools that you provided, and just a ton of questions and great engagement again. So thank you all. We'll be sure to send all those resources out as well, too. And very quick, lastly, if you all are new to ACMP and want to get more involved, we have a little QR code here that gives you a link to all these different resources that we have from our chapter as well, too. So visit our website, information on how to become a member of ACMP SoCal, and then also our LinkedIn company pages, our group pages, and our chapter community page, and also our YouTube channel. So please give us a scan and follow us and stay connected as we continue to learn and celebrate and connect. Thank you all. Have a wonderful evening.
All right, thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good work, everyone. Great presentation. And Ahad, way to go with all those extra slides that you had in the background as well, too. That's pretty neat. There was a lot of people that showed a lot of love for that as well. I think he left us.
Haji, great job.
Thank you.
Yeah, your MC skills are spot on, and just preparing this, and the slides are gorgeous and really, really nicely done.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
And really, choosing presenters that will give practical solutions is
huge.
so important because, you know, in early on in the deck, I was starting to get a little worried. To be honest, I was like, are we just going to talk about problems the whole time? But then when they came through with the toolkit, I thought, yes, this is what we want.
Yeah, it was great.
It was so good.
Hey, Haji, this is Shauna. You probably want to stop the recording.
Yep.
Oh.